Thank you very much, John. And hello, Lini and Davina. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining our program. Yeah, Lini, it's been nearly a year since the pandemic started here in the US. What has changed from your perspective, from a CFO, as well as from a business continuity perspective?
I'd say no matter the company, that the shift in relative emphasis on the tactical and the short term continues. It's not to say there's not a focus on long term, but the realities of the pandemic have required that you focus on the needs of the business to manage through it for all of your stakeholders. So whether it's how you run your back office because of working remotely, to dealing with liquidity in rapidly changing environments, to frankly taking advantage of the crisis to come out stronger on the other side.
Thank you. I'll come back to some of those later. Davina, sort of, if you think about your role at Waste Management, what is your single biggest insight or learning from the recent months and the pandemic?
You know, to narrow it down to one single thing is really, really difficult. But I think for all leaders, not just CFOs, what I think we're all stepping back from, certainly agree with some of Lini's comments about the need to focus in a more short-term view and business continuity. For us, I think the resounding focus has been on people and connectivity, whether it be our team members or our customers. In addition to that, I think big learnings are about where those long-term investments should be. So how should we be investing more fully in technology and in people so that we differentiate ourselves as a service provider and as an employer of choice? You know, from a finance perspective specifically, we all talk about the new normal. We try and say, this isn't our new normal, this is the now normal. And so for us, it's less about thinking about this environment, but positioning ourselves for a strong recovery when the economy rebounds. I think CFOs tend to think about the need for a leaner, more efficient organization at all times. I think we have to balance that with a responsibility for thinking long-term and making sure that we're making investments in the right places that will position us for strength.
Yeah, well, we're doing this via Zoom today, and I think you've done most of or a lot of your work in recent months via Zoom and other remote platforms. I've reported about sort of companies that are closing the books remotely, that are hosting annual general meetings remotely, even doing fundraising, IPOs, basically a lot of things that you as CFOs are doing on a day-to-day business has moved to the remote world. Sort of, Lini, how does that work for you at Marriott? Sort of what is working well remotely and what isn't?
So I think being a big global company has obviously been a big advantage as we started the pandemic, because right off the bat, you had to go into immediate remote work 100%. And as you think about global cash management and the systems that we had in place, and closing the books, for example, we were actually in a good position to perform really well. So I think in that regard, we've been really pleased with that it's been as smooth as it has been. I think it's on things like more complicated areas of process planning, of strategic work that you're doing, where large remote meetings, frankly, they just do not work as well. Much more inefficient. You don't have the ability to brainstorm as quickly or as well. And then I think the people part is just really lost. And that's where in those ongoing dialogues, the richest part of your work as a team happens. And so that's the part that I look forward to the most, in addition to going out and being on the road and seeing our other associates in our hotels, is being able to work more efficiently together.
Is there an example that you can mention, sort of talking about, you were talking about the challenges around process planning and longer terms strategies and projects that you can mention to illustrate this challenge that you've experienced?
Yeah, sure.
Doing it remotely?
Sure, we're several years in and really well down the road in our integration of a very large acquisition of Starwood Hotels. And so there are a number of things that we've done integrating all of our systems and all of our loyalty program, et cetera. We launched last year a whole entire new payroll processing and HR management system. And that was to go live and it did go live at the end of December of this year. Working through with 7,600 hotels and hundreds of thousands of associates and all the mechanics that it takes to make that work well and perfectly with that big of a transition was extraordinarily more difficult. Being all remote. I'm happy to say it went well, but I think it ended up taking meaningfully more time than it would have taken had we not been remote.
Davida, how's that at Waste Management? You've been mentioning sort of the focus on people before. Sort of what are your learnings in terms of working remotely as CFO of a large organization? And also, do you have thoughts on what you think will stay remote once the pandemic has hopefully ended?
So, thinking about what stays remote once the pandemic has ended, I would answer it simply by saying, I think it's going to be part of every work week. I think that's a demand from our people that is real. And that's about flexibility for them and them feeling empowered to get their work done in the place that's most conducive to their current, objectives. I couldn't agree more with Leanie about certain processes that just really require that face-to-face interaction, the brainstorming, the collaboration, the innovation, the professional development and growth. And so I think people are going to be hungry for connecting again face-to-face, but at the same time, they're going to require of us that we give them a more flexible work environment than they had in the past. At Waste Management, we raised funds to fund an acquisition. We renegotiated that acquisition. We've closed the books several times and issued financial statements. We've, made sure that we've integrated payroll for this acquisition. Really, that we've proven that just about everything can be done remotely. So it's not about whether it can be done remotely, it's about whether it should be done remotely. And what do we give up by continuing the remote work environment? And what can we gain by getting back together?
Do you already sort of have an early answer for that? Do you have thoughts at this point in time as to what you think should stay remote versus be turned into face-to-face again?
I think there are going to be little in the way of limitations on what can be done remotely at any point in time. For us, it's going to be much more about setting standards with regard to how we make sure that we get the best of collaboration. So, during financial statement close processes where evaluation of performance is imperative, those conversations are most rich and most insightful when we're together. So as we have quarterly business review meetings and as we evaluate the month-end financial statements, we'll do that face-to-face because the engagement creates a better, richer product.
Leanie, how's that with regards to financial planning and forecasting? That's, of course, an essential part for you both as CFOs as we're looking at 2021 and what the year's going to look like. The pandemic, of course, has made many financial forecasts obsolete. How have you reworked your financial planning and forecasting process, specifically in an industry which has been impacted so much by the pandemic?
I think the word is flexibility, Nina. At the end of the day, kind of what we were doing in April and May compared to what we were doing now, although they're both really different from where we were a year and a half ago, it has already changed dramatically just in the past 7 months. So when you think about the visibility that we had in April, it was nil. Our revenues had dropped by 90%. We were very focused on truly the immediate short term. While now it's much more about planning for the recovery. In that case, just to give you an example, we usually start off a year with a big chunk of our business already, 75% of it already on the books, our group business. so that you can do a much better job of forecasting what you need in the way of labor and cost structure, et cetera. While right now, group business is largely non-existent. And so it's transient business, and that booking window is under 7 days. So in that case, it's really about working with the hotel properties and all of our teams about being as nimble and as flexible as possible. And the other part I would talk about for forecasting is really all about cash. I think companies are obviously always working on short-term budgets and long-range plans, but I think getting into the level of detail on cash forecasting is probably something that we've gotten even better at over the last year, and we will continue to keep that up.
Yeah, I remember from previous interviews that we've had at CFO Journal talking to CFOs about cash and liquidity, and often hearing from CFOs, especially in the first weeks of the pandemic, cash is king. Is that true, Davina, for waste management still, nearly a year into the pandemic?
You know, cash is king. I would say as an essential service, waste management has a luxury that, the luxury businesses or the, airlines or hospitality have not enjoyed. So I can tell you that while cash is king, cash is something that this business still does a tremendous job of generating on a pretty predictable basis. And while we've adjusted our forecasting processes and our modeling to ensure that we're thinking about stress tests and scenario planning and having adequate liquidity, not just for the day-to-day, but for the long term, our processes, I think, have been refined. Some of our forecasting processes, I think, are a little more rigid and intended to give us visibility into the range of possibilities rather than the single most likely outcome. Am I getting more value from those? I would tell you I'm not exactly sure. What I know that we're doing is using more of our day-to-day operational data to use that in extending it into our financial forecasts, because the day-to-day operational data, I think, is what's being used as the best indicator of what the recovery will look like.
Lini, are you doing that too? Sort of, are there additional operational metrics that you're watching? And also, are there other additional metrics that you're watching more closely now than you would have done prior to the pandemic?
Yes, we traditionally, in a more normal environment, are actually a negative working capital company. So we typically, from our ongoing operations, the way our receivables and payables work, we typically generate cash. So now in the pandemic, when you're looking at literally the opposite in terms of needing to pay our bills, but also having thousands of hotel owners challenged by the dramatic drop in revenues to paying their receivables to us, has taken a real turn. So we obviously are paying much more attention than in a typical year to the changes in working capital, all of the health of our owners and franchisees, doing everything we can at the properties to help preserve their cash flow, so reducing costs, et cetera. So I think in that regard, there is, I would say, a greater focus on truly week-to-week and month-to-month flows of expenses and revenues in and out of the hotels than clearly in a more normal environment you would have. The other thing I think is when we think of scenarios, we definitely consider, especially now where the timing of the recovery is so uncertain, we really have to have a very wide range of scenarios to make sure that the company is comfortable plowing through it. And as a result, no surprise, our cash level is higher right now than we normally would maintain.
How is that, Davina, at Waste Management? You were saying sort of as a service provider, sort of you've had stable cash flows and income. Sort of what is your expectation in terms of the economic recovery that is expected for this year? Sort of, and how far would that help your business, given that there is a certain stability in your business anyway?
I think when we looked at our 2021 financial plans and then extending that out even further, what we did is look at the foundation of that essential service, look at what we learned from a cost reduction perspective. We've talked about an optimal work week as an example and learned some things about decreasing overtime hours, which are the most expensive work hours of the day. We've also learned some things about investing in technology in a more focused way that is customer centric. All in all, I think those things tied with the economic outlook, which is variable based on industry. So historically, we've used things like CPI and GDP and housing starts, and those things are averages for the entire country. Now we're looking on a more local basis, so market by market, because experiences in Southern California are very different than those in Texas or New England, as an example. So we're using a more granular approach with regard to financial outlook. And then we're also using a more sector by sector, customer segment by customer segment view of what we think the recovery will look like. Because of the resilience of our business model, the fact it's an essential service, there's a strong backbone in our business that will provide continued strength. But for us, it's about coming out stronger by learning from how we reduce our costs and become more nimble and agile from an investment perspective, so that we produce even stronger results on the other side.
Actually, because you were talking about the metrics that you're now looking at and that you are looking at more now than you did before, Lini, and how far you were talking about scenarios and forecasts before, and how far is the COVID vaccine and the fact that it's now authorized and it's being rolled out here in the US, and how far is that a factor that you're specifically looking at for your business?
Well, that's frankly the key, Nina. At the end of the day, our strong sense is that people are dying to travel, that they really, really want to get out there. They want to see each other. They want to be with family and friends. They frankly want to be with work associates. It's an important part of their work and their play. And in many respects, we see that demand, clearly in just even the visits to our booking sites, which since the vaccine has been announced that it's rolling out, we have seen increased visits to the sites. And I think pretty much everybody you talk to, whether it's your neighbor or on Zoom calls, that everyone's looking forward to the freedom of being able to travel. And in that regard, we are looking at cash modeling that expects a variety, because we can't predict when every country will really have it well distributed. And we have, again, got to be prepared for all of those possibilities.
I'll have some more questions for you, but we also have some questions from our audience, which I'll turn to now. We have one question from Xavier Calves, who is asking, have you been considering eliminating offices that would appear to be not necessary anymore in a confinement or working from home situation? I don't know who wants to jump on that one.
Well, I can actually say, Waste Management was in the process of investing in a new corporate headquarters before the pandemic began. And the leadership team could not be more excited and thrilled to welcome everyone to that new headquarters. Sure, we stepped back from it and gave some serious thought to whether or not the investment we were making was the right long-term investment. But I think we've spoken to the fact that while flexibility and giving our employees the choice about where they need to work at any given time to get today's job done is going to be a priority, we know that collaboration, innovation, growth, professional investment, that all happens when we're working together face to face. And so we can't wait to welcome everyone back once it's safe and appropriate to do so.
So you didn't sort of, for that plan for that new headquarter, you didn't sort of, I don't know, shrink it or sort of cut out certain parts that you don't think you're going to need because less people will be working in the office, like the building is still going to be the way that you planned it?
In almost every respect, it's exactly as planned. We ensure that it's ready from a social distancing perspective to welcome people back. before the vaccine is fully rolled out. So we took additional steps from that regard, but we did not shrink our square footage in the headquarters from the original plan. I would tell you we invested even more in collaboration space in building out the floors than we had before.
Lini, how's that at Marriott?
So I was really happy to hear what Davina said about their new headquarters, because we're probably a year ahead of where Davina and Waste Management are, in that we had begun construction on our new corporate headquarters in downtown Bethesda about a year and a half ago. So we are moving in mid-22, and we're thrilled. Very similar to the things Davina has said about the way that we're trying to set up our headquarters. We only believe it's more important for the collaboration and for the development of kind of all the important parts of our culture of Marriott. I would say the digitization effort is the part that we have stepped up the investment to make sure that we can allow for this greater flexibility in our workforce and be able to collaborate in a way that permits that. So I think there again, perhaps some shifts in the way the space is used and the technology. But again, I know that our associates are going to be thrilled to come to this building because it's going to be special.
Do you already know sort of what the frequency will be like for people to return to the office? Like how frequent people will be in the office for your team, for example, for the finance function?
Yeah, we're still working through all that. Obviously, it varies depending on kind of the function and the discipline and the region that you're involved in. The only other thing I will say, Nina, is that as part of our effort, we did take advantage of the crisis, and in a number of our support offices with digitization, we were able to reduce the number of some outposts. So for example, we might have had 6 claims offices for insurance claims before, and now we're down to 3. And that is, a lot of that is to increase productivity and efficiency, but also continue to keep that ability to collaborate.
We have one more question from the audience, and then I think we'll have to wrap up in a minute. But from the audience, there's a question from Vibhu Sharma, who's asking, have you changed your planning cycle due to the current environment and high level of uncertainty due to COVID? One of you has about 1 minute for that. Davina, do you want to give it a go?
Yeah, I would tell you, go ahead, Lainey. Sorry.
You go.
Well, I would tell you we've not changed our planning cycles at all. They're exactly the same as they were before. I think early on, to Leanie's point earlier, we did take a more tactical day by day, week by week, month by month view. We've now been able to move away from that and return to more normal monthly cycles that we were on in the past.
Leanie, I saw you nodding.
So similar path.
Okay, thank you very much, both. It was a pleasure to have you on stage, and I'll hand over to John now, who's going to lead you throughout the rest of the program. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Nina. Thank you, everybody.